look strong. The headline numbers look strong. By extension, the consumer looks strong. Is that the right way of reading this?
So good morning. I was a little surprised by the strength in the top line number. Of course, that was driven a lot by gasoline sales, higher gas prices. The top line number isn't adjusted for inflation. But even so, in our own spending data that we collect based on surveys of consumers as opposed to businesses, which is what the retail report does today, consumers had reported spending less in real terms from July to August. So that tends to correlate pretty closely with the retail sales report. So for that reason, I was a little bit surprised by the strength. But after adjusting for the stronger inflation numbers we also saw this past month, it doesn't look quite so strong. So definitely some signs of deceleration in the spending growth on retail.
Right. That's why it feels like some are calling it Goldilocks, right? Because it's decelerating, but it's not dropping off a cliff. Like, it's still solid. Guy and I talked a lot yesterday about the Taylor Swift economy and sort of the input there. And I'm literally curious as to how much of the data that we've gotten over the last 3 months, particularly July was revised upwards as well, has to do with that stuff, like concerts, going to movies, Barbie, etc. And then does that really drop off and we see something materially different, say, next month?
So one of the things I really like about the data we collect at Morning Consult is in our spending data, we're able to chop it up into different demographic groups. And while we're not asking specifically the detail, how much did you spend on Taylor Swift tickets, we do track sort of recreational categories, including concerts and things like that. And what we've seen in our data that really reflects that strong splurging summer that we've seen, a lot of that was coming from younger consumers spending on things like recreation and travel, just really going out and having fun over the summer. What's interesting and what I think is going to be a headwind for that goes all the way to top line spending most likely this fall is because so much of that discretionary spending is being done by younger consumers. That's kind of the same group that's going to be more affected by things like the student loan repayment pause. This group also tends to have less savings, so things like higher credit card interest rates. There's just a lot of gathering headwinds for that group. And because the spending that has been so strong is discretionary, it's a little bit easier to pull back on that and cut that from budget. So for that reason, I think we may start to see more headwinds this fall.
I know this is maybe this is a difficult question to answer, but sort of anecdotally, this is a group, though, that feels like they have changed their behavior on a more permanent basis. They don't maybe see the need to save in the same way as previous generations. They maybe don't see themselves owning a house in the way that previous generations had. Is that going to maybe support that spending for longer?
It's definitely possible. We do consistently see lower levels of concern about inflation from younger adults as well. But where I think we might start to see potentially some shifts back to maybe a more traditional attitude is as we start to see the labor market slowing, because it isn't just prices that have been rising very rapidly. Wage gains, especially for some of these, entry-level jobs that may be what younger consumers are experiencing. They haven't really experienced high unemployment the past few years either. So as we do start to see some more cracks form in the labor market, which we very slowly are starting to see, and slower wage gains as well, that might be something that causes them to kind of reflect on their household finances and really start to feel those pressures that actually already are there, but they're maybe not as aware of or concerned about.
So walk me through the data that you have for people like me who love to shop. So I feel like I correlate to the retail economy, right? I only shop on sales, but I love to shop, but I'm on a budget. Sometimes I blow it, but I'm working really hard to keep to it, and I want to save money instead. I feel like I help drive the economy. Like, what am I doing right now?
So one of the data sets that we've been tracking that I think is one of the most unique things we do is we have these indexes that track price sensitivity and trading down. And again, we can look at this across different income levels, different age groups, et cetera. And I think what's been really interesting with those, it's really trying to kind of connect how price changes drive purchasing decisions and how consumer demand responds when prices go up or down. And what we've seen in those indexes the last few months is that price sensitivity compared to a year ago is elevated, but we've seen actually, and initially that was moving with trading down, but just the last few months, trading down has kind of fallen off, so consumers aren't substituting as much. So what that says to me on the price sensitivity side is that consumers still are very price conscious. They're reacting not just to the pace of inflation. They're not reading the CPI report and like, inflation's slower, I should buy more. They're actually looking at the price levels and still experiencing sticker shock. And that's why there is a lot of deal driven behavior like Amazon Prime Day, things like that. I think that contributed to the strength in July. On the trading down front, I think it's interesting that we've seen a drop off in that. And what I read that as is because of these elevated price levels, most consumers, in this inflationary environment, those that could trade down have traded down. And now, if you've already switched from Whole Foods to Walmart, you don't have as far to fall. So there's not as much opportunity to find more affordable substitutes. And I think that's kind of an interesting trend to watch.
Does that apply to the really upper end of the income spectrum? It was interesting, Richemont, the owner of Cartier and things like that, Johan Rupert the other day was talking about the fact that in Europe, even upper end consumers that would normally purchase goods from his business, and we're talking high end here, are starting to feel the effects of inflation. Is that true also in the United States?
Yeah. And well, in short, yes. We don't have super detailed demographics, but the way we define our upper income is anything over $100,000 a year for annual household income as our sort of upper end group. And what's interesting is they tend to be less price sensitive than those earning less. But in a year over year terms, when we look back to how price sensitive they were, what their scores were a year ago, they've actually increased the most over that time. So it took them the longest to kind of feel the effects of inflation. But that group really is now. And that's another potential driver of slower spending this fall, because again, that's a group that spends a lot on the discretionary categories, which are easier to